Sometimes the most difficult part of the journey is the final step. One step away. That is where the Boston Celtics found themselves after the 2017 and 2018 season, which seen them make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, and where they would go into a showdown with the King, LeBron James himself, needing all 7 games to determine a winner, in which the Celtics would fall short, losing 79-87 in the Eastern Conference Finals, ending their incredible season. One step away. As did I fail to mention that this run was led by gentlemen within their first several years of the league, a rookie in Jason Tatum, a sophomore in Jaylen Brown, third year Terry Rozier, fourth year Marcus Smart, Marcus Morris, and Al Horford being the 2 vets. And to be adding back a all-star forward and Gordon Hayward, and a superstar champion winning point guard in Kyrie Irving to the second seeded team, one step away from a potential dynasty. After all, there was an Anthony Davis trade also on the horizon, as it had been in the rumors for the last several years, but it finally seemed to be coming to fruition. Only thing in its way was the Rose Rule. Were the Boston Celtics one step away from being the next NBA dynasty? Join me as we take a rewind in time this week, as we look back at the 2018-2019 Boston Celtics. Coming off of a 2017-2018 campaign which seen the 55-win Boston Celtics capture the 2nd seed, and as I mentioned, make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, where en route they would first go 7 games with the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis Antetokounmpo, the future 2-time MVP and Finals MVP. Second round would see them beat the Philadelphia 76ers in convincing fashion, just needing 5 games, winning 4-1, before ultimately going up against LeBron James and losing in Game 7, ending their season. Now, heading into the 2018 season, the Boston Celtics would be coming off of 2 straight Eastern Conference Finals, and both were done without Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving. Now, of course, for the first time, there were real expectations with this team. After all, as there should be. This was a team coming off of consecutive number 1 or 2 seed final appearances in the regular season with their overall record, as well as finishing at number 1 or 2 in the division as they got beat in the Eastern Conference Finals back-to-back years. And oh, by the way, they were adding back 2 of the top players in the entire world. One was already a champion, and a proven champion at that, who was coming off of a campaign with the Celtics where he averaged nearly 25 points and 5+ assists. Now, there were, of course, some small concerns. How would Kyrie and Gordon Hayward respond coming off of injuries, especially Gordon's being as gruesome as it was? How would their minutes and the rotation be affected overall? How would all of the players from the previous year who went on a deep Eastern Conference Finals run and who had thrived handle new roles, potentially reduced minutes? And a thing that kind of went under the radar was the fact that multiple players were on contract years, including Kyrie Irving, Al Horford, Terry Rozier, Marcus Morris. So many members of their star and key rotation players were on contract years. But the reality is that the goods far outweighed any of the bads, so much so that the bads literally were an afterthought. We were flying high as Celtics fans. The media had us as favorites heading into the 2018-2019 season. the only real drama could be, honestly, Terry Rozier spoiling our upcoming first round draft pick when he called Danny Ainge live. With the 27th pick in the 2018-2019 NBA draft, the Boston Celtics would select Robert Williams out of Texas A&M. Rob Williams was coming off of 2 consecutive years at Texas A&M where he averaged right around 10 and nearly 10. Not quite a double-double, but was also a defensive powerhouse, a true rim protector, and a freak athlete. However, there were some concerns around his work ethic that ended up being a blessing for the Boston Celtics, as Robert Williams was a projected lottery pick, but fell all the way to the bottom of the first round where the Boston Celtics would grab him. Coincidentally enough, Rob Williams would be given the nickname Time Lord. Now, the origin story behind this nickname kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of his concerns coming out of college, as Mr. Williams overslept for his introductory conference call and consequently missed his flight to Boston and the team's first practice. Now, this, in addition to a gentleman by the name of Ryan Herbert, excuse me if I mispronounced, sir, once stating back in the crazy Celtics Twitter sphere that Rob was simply operating on a different timeline than the rest of us. Now, this drama with Rob, as we all know how he's turned out, has been excellent as a starting center in today's NBA. And with what was next to come for this Boston Celtics this season, this little bit of drama to start the season would literally be nearly forgettable. And to put the icing on the cake for what was a perfect offseason for the Boston Celtics, in early October, NBA.com would publish an article stating Kyrie Irving doesn't plan on going anywhere next year, according to Kyrie Irving. As Kyrie Irving stood in TD Garden in front of season ticket holders, he would state, and I quote, "If you'll have me, I plan on resigning here." The crowd erupted as Kyrie Irving was essentially committing to the Boston Celtics with his upcoming free agency coming at the end of next season. Now, when speaking to media after the fact, Kyrie would simply relate it to timing, stating that he felt it was the perfect timing, that he was happy to get it done with, and to just clear it up overall. Now, in Kyrie Irving's defense, this would be pretty much the only question he would probably have received the entirety of the upcoming season, and it would have truly been a distraction, so it is admirable. I understand why he did it. Obviously, it comes back to kind of bite him, but at that time, I can see he probably really did have every intent to re-sign, and let's be honest, after every game, it would be, so Kyrie, what are you going to do this upcoming offseason? Hey, Kyrie, are you going to re-sign? Hey, Kyrie. So I think it was his way of trying to not be a distraction, which the irony of that, because of some of the events that would come to unfold throughout the season. The Boston Celtics would start the 2018-2019 season hot, winning 6 out of their first 8 games before ultimately cooling off a bit and ending up at 10 wins and 10 losses after 20 games. Right at 500, though, hope was still at a high as Kyrie Irving would drop a commercial with his dad playing one-on-one in TD Garden, where he would state that he would want, basically insinuating that he would want to have his jersey retired in the Raptors one day. After this, the Celtics would go on to win 8 in a row before ultimately losing 3 straight. At this point in the season, we were already starting to see early signs as December brought back-to-back team meetings after those last 3 consecutive L's. They would then go on to win 7 out of the next 9 after these meetings. Pay attention to these streaks, because this would basically be the story of the season, and you will really understand its importance as we get towards the conclusion of this video. Just to give you an idea, the Boston Celtics would finish with 33 total losses on the season. Only 9 of the 33 were actually single losses and not a part of a consecutive loss streak. So think of it as 9 times the Celtics would lose and then immediately get a win back. It wouldn't be an L and then 2, 3, 4 L's. Like I said, streaks and patterns would pretty much be the story of this season. And then came January. January is where we would start to see this team unravel and show signs of clear frustration and disconnect. During the last play of a loss to the Orlando Magic, 103-105, Gordon Hayward would inbound the ball to Jason Tatum in what looked to be a play designed to go to Al Horford, and then a cutting Kyrie Irving would either receive the pass or Al Horford would then make the decision on what to do. However, Gordon making the decision to go to Jason Tatum would result in Kyrie Irving clearly questioning him, showing clear frustration while on the court, while ultimately walking away from him before it got too bad. He would go on post-game to actually criticize his teammates. That, on top of a loss to the Brooklyn Nets, coincidentally, would follow up and trigger the infamous "I had to call Bron" from Kyrie, which occurred on January 16, 2019. Kyrie Irving actually stated, "I had to call Bron and tell him I apologize for being that young player that wanted everything at his fingertips." This came after the Celtics beat the Toronto Raptors 118-107 on Wednesday. Chris Forsberg would go out to tweet stating, "Kyrie, I'm calling LeBron. The responsibility of being the best in the world and leading your team is something that is not meant for many people. Only few are meant for it or chosen for it. And I feel like the best person to call was him." Stating that he did a poor job of setting an example for these young guys on what it's like to get something out of your teammates. He did say going forward that he will test them, but he cannot do it publicly, and that he had learned from the experience. Now, that would get some positive results, so to speak, as the Boston Celtics would go on to win 12 out of the next 15 games heading into the All-Star break. And even though they were on a run and things did seem to be going well, early February, Kyrie Irving, when asked if he planned to still re-sign with the Boston Celtics, if his mindset had changed regarding the re-signing with the Celtics, he would now state,
"Has your mindset shifted though in regards to re-signing with Boston, like the announcement?"
Ask me July 1st.
"Ask me July 1st. Simply saying that he is going to do what is best for his career. He would then go on to say that the plan is to still be a Celtic, and that Boston is obviously at the front of the race. So now, this on top of what would come next during the All-Star game / break would open up the absolute floodgates of drama, rumors, and distractions for the remainder of the season for the Boston Celtics. Heading into All-Star weekend, a huge story would break when a viral clip of Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant would show Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant in the hallway of All-Star break, and it would show Kyrie Irving holding up 2 fingers stating 2 max openings. Now, of course, when questioned about it after the fact, Kyrie Irving essentially would state, "It's nobody's business. What I do with my life is my business, so it's none of yours. It's not anybody's business, right? So it's a video of me and one of my best friends talking, and then it turns out to be a dissection of my free agency meeting? Do you get it? Like, do you get that? And then I'm asked questions about it. That's what disconnects me from all that shit." End quote. Now, you do clearly see a video where Kyrie is stating 2 max spots, it's time. And the irony behind him saying this is, well, we all know how it turned out, obviously, with him and LeBron. With him and Kevin Durant going to Brooklyn. Now, in his defense, he's absolutely right. It is nobody's business. He had every single right to do what he did to move on. Obviously, the other side of that argument is to keep your word, especially a word once given to tens of thousands of people in person, millions, through the internet or TV. So I understand both sides of it. But all this would do is continue to put an absolute dark cloud of drama around the Boston Celtics for the remainder of their season. The Boston Celtics would go on to lose 4 straight games immediately coming out of the All-Star break, before turning it around and winning 6 out of the next 8. Now, these 6 out of 8 were symbolic because during this run was the infamous West Coast plane meeting, where their reports came out that the Celtics had a multiple players only meeting while flying throughout the West Coast trip, and that the thought had been that they were finally clicking and coming together, just in time for the playoffs. However, immediately after this run, the Boston Celtics would go on to lose 4 more in a row. These 4, or I should say the last loss of that 4, would be significant, however, because after this last loss, the Boston Celtics would then go on to win 6 out of the next 8 games going into the playoffs. And if you then take into consideration the results of the first 5 games of the playoffs, the Boston Celtics would be on a run going into game 2 of round 2, where out of the last 13 games, they had won 11 of them. But again, what has this season taught us about runs? Let's discuss the Boston Celtics start to the 2019 playoffs, where they would meet the Indiana Pacers. The Boston Celtics would finish the 2018-2019 season with a record of 49 wins and 33 losses, which would secure them the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference. The season would be led by Kyrie Irving, averaging 24 points, 5 rebounds, and nearly 7 assists throughout, which was good enough to secure him an All-Star appearance. Second year, Jason Tatum would follow up behind him, averaging nearly 16 points and 6 rebounds. You would see both Jaylen Brown and Al Horford averaging 13 points apiece, with Marcus Morris averaging 14 and 6. Gordon Hayward in his first year coming back from injury, averaging 11 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists. And Terry Rozier averaging 9 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists in 23 minutes. Heading into the playoffs, the Boston Celtics would meet the 5th seed Indiana Pacers. Now, unfortunately, Indiana would be without its star and Victor Oladipo for the entirety of this series. Now, the Boston Celtics would win this series in a 4-0 sweep. However, I do not believe that tells the entire story. This was no walk in the park by any stretch of the imagination, as all 4 games were decided by between 4 and 10 points as the Pacers fought throughout. And especially when you take into consideration this was a Pacers team made up of Darren Collison, Wes Matthews, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Thaddeus Young, Miles Turner, and a young Sabonis coming off the bench, with Bogdan Bogdanovic beating their leader, averaging 18 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists. The Pacers have nothing to be ashamed of, and they can hold their head high after this series. Now on the Celtics side, they would be led by Kyrie Irving, coming out in Game 1, getting 26 points and 11 assists, and Al Horford, who would get 20 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 blocks in Game 1. Now throughout the series, Kyrie would take them to victory, averaging 23 points, 5 rebounds, and 8 assists. And his partner in crime, second-year man Jason Tatum, would be averaging 19 and 5 throughout. Now, for the remainder of the team, you would see both Al Horford and Jaylen Brown average 11 points throughout this series, with both Marcus Morris and Gordon Hayward averaging right at 12 points and about 6 rebounds. However, Terry Rozier, and I want you to pay attention to these numbers, would average 7 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists. Heading into round 2, the Boston Celtics would meet the reigning MVP in Giannis Antetokounmpo and the first-seeded Milwaukee Bucks. Now, this was a series that the Bucks were, without question, the favorites and riding very high despite the Celtics coming off of a 4-0 sweep the previous round. However, that would quickly change as the Boston Celtics would come out Game 1 and smack the Bucks in the mouth, winning 112-90, being led by both Kyrie Irving and Al Horford in their brilliant performances. This, after all, shakes up everything, as now the Boston Celtics have home court advantage throughout. And if you remember, what did I say? This would now put them on a stretch of 11 wins out of the last 13 games. But how many times did we mention what this season was about? Streaks. What exactly is a streak equal? Inconsistency. And if the Celtics are currently winning 11 out of the last 13, what do you think they are due for? You guessed it. The Boston Celtics would then go on to lose the next 4 straight, being eliminated from the playoffs in the second round after Game 5. Giannis Antetokounmpo absolutely dominated this entire series, averaging nearly 29 points, 11 rebounds, and 5 assists, with Chris Middleton averaging 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists. Giannis would come out Game 2 and have 32 points, 13 rebounds, 8 assists, and 3 blocks. He would then follow that up with a 39-point, 16-rebound performance, a 29.9 rebound performance, and a 20.8 and 8 to close it out. And on the Boston Celtics side, you had Kyrie Irving leading the way, averaging 20 points, 4 rebounds, and nearly 6.5 assists, with Al Horford and Jaylen Brown averaging 16 points, Marcus Morris averaging 15 points and 9.5 rebounds. You had Gordon Hayward average 7.5 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. You had Jason Tatum average 12 and 7, and Terry Rozier averaged 6 points and 5 rebounds. Now, following up this game, a lot of narratives and more drama would obviously ensue, but immediately after, did Kyrie Irving deliberately shoot the Celtics out started to make its way through the airways. Throughout the series against the Bucks, Kyrie Irving would score 102 total points, but he would do so on 104 shots. If you take that into consideration with his body language throughout, and Terry Rozier stating it didn't even feel like the playoffs, it really put some fuel on this fire. And that was just the beginning. As the Boston Celtics season was ending, you would immediately start seeing all the drama behind the curtain, so to speak, immediately starting with the exit interviews. Now, at the conclusion of these exit interviews, it would only be a week later before Terry Rozier would go on his ESPN tour, where he would make appearances on First Take, among other shows. On these episodes, he would speak of his sacrifice. He would talk about the lack of execution when it came to Brad Stevens and his game plan. He would talk about the difficult situation Brad was in. He would then also talk about Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving, as you had Max and Stephen A. Smith, who were basically starting this debate on whose fault it was. Stephen A. Smith was more so focused on Gordon Hayward and his returning, basically citing that Gordon Hayward, coming off of an injury, getting such a heavy amount of minutes, being reintroduced when he clearly was not anything close to being at all-star form, and that really cutting in to the other players who had just gone on this run's minutes really threw off the chemistry. Whereas Max Kellerman laid more of the blame at Kyrie Irving, stating, "You wanted a team, you got it." So was the issue more so Gordon Hayward coming back, or was it the adjusting to Kyrie Irving, is the question that they posed to Terry Rozier. Terry would basically state it was a bit of both, stating that the stars, being Gordon and Kyrie, were just treated differently. It was almost like the team didn't need to make adjustments for them, and adjustments didn't apply to them. You would also hear about favoritism, especially when it came to Gordon Hayward. After all, this was Brad Stevens' collegiate player, a guy that he sat in this young man's living room when he was in high school, getting ready for prom to recruit. So there was a bunch of favoritism around that, speculation, and then Kyrie being ball dominant, and then the narrative around them just being better off without Kyrie. After all, if you look at the 15 games the Celtics played without Kyrie Irving that year, they went 12-3. Not only that, but if you look at how the team performed, especially Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward averaged 11 points on the season. Without Kyrie in the lineup, he was averaging nearly 17. So from 11 to 17. And then Terry Rozier, who was averaging 9 points and 4 rebounds, went up to over 16 points. So you're talking about from 9 to over 16, and from 11 to nearly 17. And a 12-3 overall record. Not to mention, what about the playoffs themselves? Look at Terry Rozier, who throughout the playoffs averaged 18 minutes and averaged 6 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists. An absolute far cry from the previous season, where he averaged 36 minutes and nearly 17 points, 5+ rebounds, and 6 assists a game. Every single player was down from their 2018 run. Tatum, who was averaging nearly 19 points, was down to 15. Jaylen Brown, who was averaging 18, is down to 13. Al Horford, who was averaging nearly 16, was down to 13. And obviously this was in fact due to Kyrie and Gordon Hayward being reintegrated, and the minutes being dramatically cut and the roles being drastically reduced. After this season from hell, so to speak, especially with the conclusion, the Terry Rozier campaign on ESPN, and just all the drama and all just the attention this team had received throughout the season, negative at that, it was only a matter of time before the chips would start to fall. And that would begin with both Kyrie Irving and Terry Rozier announcing their plans to move on in late July, with Kyrie Irving deciding to join Kevin Durant. 2 max openings, right? It's time. On a max contract in Brooklyn, playing for the Brooklyn Nets. Terry Rozier would actually become involved in a sign-and trade with the Charlotte Hornets. More on that in a moment. And you would see Al Horford agree shortly after, in July, to rival Philadelphia 76ers in a 4-year contract. followed up with Marcus Morris, who originally agreed to a 2-year, $20 million contract with the Spurs before ultimately deciding to join the Knicks on a 1-year, $15 million contract. Now, back to that sign and trade with Terry Rozier, that would actually bring back Kemba Walker to the Boston Celtics, as that would become their big offseason move going in to the 2019-2020 season. The Boston Celtics would sign both Kemba Walker and Enes Kanter, who is now NSK Freedom, as they prepared to go on another Eastern Conference run in a year that would be known as the bubble season. But that is a story for another day. So what exactly went wrong with this season? Just to speak freely, I believe it is a combo of many things. And by combination of multiple things, what I mean is, I don't think Max or Stephen A. Smith were necessarily wrong. I believe Terry was spot on with pretty much his assessment. When you talk about, the return of both Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving, you're first off bringing two players back from injuries, especially Gordon, an absolutely gruesome injury. So it's just hard to know how they're going to reintegrate back. And then when you just talk about the fact that the minutes, how heavy their minutes are. I mean, these are two star level players. So you've got Gordon in the mid-20s and then Kyrie 30 plus. And then all of the players that were just on the ECF run. It's so much to ask them to go from averaging in the mid-30 minutes and having success to go back to averaging, 20, 23. It's just, that's a lot. And he's right to use the word sacrifices. And he's right when it's Brad Stevens being in an impossible situation. When you really think of it, it's like that is Brad's first time ever really truly handling a superstar on that of that caliber, so to speak. And then when you hear favoritism, it's like, where does he supposed to do? You've got this player in Gordon Hayward that's making 30 plus million. You've got to try to get him back up to speed. The only way he's going to get back up to speed is by playing. And the quicker you get him back to where he was at, the better off you are at potentially winning a championship. But then by doing that, it's like, this is your boy from college, so of course he's got to deal with that. So it just seems like, the perfect storm of just the chemistry issues. And then as soon as the streaks, the up and down started, going, it was just one of those things where it was kind of destined and doomed. You know what I mean? Like, if this team would have been hot and winning, I don't think these problems would have been at the forefront. But to me, another big factor is just bad timing, honestly, just bad luck. What I mean by that is, first off, the Rose rule, I think, is what really plays into effect with this team, because it just seemed like for the longest time it was almost like fated that Anthony Davis was going to end up on this team. Once they got Kyrie, it was going to be like a trade to get AD over, and you would see like a Kyrie, Hayward, and then AD. And then if they kept either Jalen or Jason, imagine that team today, because, if Jason is still there, then you have Kyrie, Smart, Hayward, Tatum, and AD. Woo! But the Rose rule essentially is a rule where, through Derrick Rose, it's something to do with rookie scale extensions and accomplishments. If they have been named to an NBA, an All-NBA team, or won a Defensive Player of the Year, or been an MVP within the last I believe it's something as in the last 2 to 3 seasons while on that rookie scale, something along those lines. But basically both Kyrie and Anthony Davis were included. And because Kyrie was already on the Celtics until he signed his next contract, AD could not be traded. So it really put the Celtics in this spot where until the offseason came and until Kyrie committed, they were tied. Their hands were tied, so to speak. They could not make that trade. And I know they were ready. They had the picks. They had the young personnel. If this rule wasn't in effect, I believe Anthony Davis would have been traded as early as that actual season. And if that happens, I don't think Kyrie Irving goes anywhere. So that's when I say bad timing. And I also think that if this team really had just one more year together, the fact that so many of them were on contract years and the fact that they were just both, people coming off injuries and, not even all of them. Because think, just the very next year, they go to the ECF, right? So imagine if they were able to just retain Terry Rozier and Al Horford. They would have probably been in the finals, in my opinion. Instead of having Enes Freedom out there, they would have had Al Horford out there guarding Bam. And then obviously, what the Celtics did next is they went on to do the sign and trade. They bring in Kemba Walker, all-star, perennial all-star with the Charlotte Hornets. Michael Jordan, they refused to give him a max contract. They actually look really smart for that now. So the Celtics bring in Kemba and Enes. I actually at the time thought it was a little bit of a panic move, even though Kemba was one of the best point guard and a superstar on the market. I thought that them bringing in a 30-year-old point guard instead of just re-signing Terry Rozier for basically half of the amount, they could have signed Terry for $18 million a season instead of $36 with Kemba. And if you look at those two's career today, you got Kemba, who's basically not even in a rotation anymore, making $9 million a season, having to be bought out. And you've got Terry averaging over 20 points a game, as one of the better combo guards in the NBA with the Charlotte Hornets. So, and again, it was for half the price at that time. So I'm big on Terry Rozier, so it is me being a little, biased there. But if I could see it all over again, if they would have just, and they didn't even actually, I believe, make an offer to Marcus Morris, which is just crazy. So letting Morris and then Horford and then Kyrie and Terry, just losing all those guys and then still to be able to turn it right back around and run back to the ECF, making it 3 out of the last 4, really is incredible. But I do want to thank you all so much if you have made it to this point in the video. I appreciate you and your time more than you can ever know. Next Wednesday, I will be actually coming up with episode 3, where I'm actually going to focus on an individual player and his magical run, and that'll actually be Isaiah Thomas. So it'll be a rewind in time with former Boston Celtics player Isaiah Thomas, and I'll just talk about the entirety of his career with the Celtics from, being traded from Phoenix, and then just what was one of the most beautiful, magical, special, magnificent, you can pick any of those words, runs that we have seen in recent memories. It really was special and one of the most magical times to be a Celtics fan. So I really, really am looking forward to, doing that video. So look for that next Wednesday. Trust the Podcast, episode 11 will be tomorrow. I believe tomorrow at 2 p.m. Stay tuned for those updates. Otherwise, guys, Jags to Riches, James Peters, thank you so much. Have an incredible conclusion to your day and an incredible rest of your week. Thank you so much.